Hi guys, Patrick here. Before I begin this video, I want to say thank you for being my subscribers. I can't believe that I have reached 1K, that there are now 1000 of you subscribed to me within 2 weeks. That's crazy. And seriously, I'm so thankful. And today's topic will be about what are the best fantasy books to read when you want to get into adult fantasy. And this is honestly one of my most requested videos or lists. As I mentioned, I've been on Goodreads for 4 years now, and for the past 4 years, a lot of people have asked me that they want to get into adult fantasy more, but they don't know what are the books they should read. And I hope this list will be able to help you guys. And to be honest, even if you are a veteran in the genre, I think these 20 books are still worth checking it out. For this list, there are some things you should know. First, there will be no grimdark books. I think grimdark books require a different video to talk about. And secondly, the majority of these books are told through first-person perspective or multiple perspective, but not too many characters. I think it's pretty important that the fantasy books you choose doesn't consist of a lot of multiple POV characters when you're looking into getting into adult fantasy. And the language used will be much more simpler. Lastly, the world building will be easy to learn. I think it's very important that these categories are met when you're not used to the complexities of epic fantasy yet. There are 20 books here. They will be divided into 3 categories. The first category will be the first book of a completed series. The second category will be a standalone of an incomplete series or a completed series. And the third and final category will be the first book of an incomplete series. Alright, let's get started. We have a lot of books to talk about here. And please remember that I have written a full review for all of the books mentioned here. So if any of these caught your interest, please, you can go ahead and check it out. The first book in this list would be The Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the first book in the Ryria Revelation series, and technically, The Theft of Swords consists of 2 books. The Ryria Revelation is a 6-book series, and this is a very good series for those of you who want to get into adult fantasy. Really, I think out of all the books mentioned, this one is the most lighthearted, and it features one of the best bromance in fantasy. Royce and Hadrian are beloved characters in the genre. Seriously, a lot of people love them, and I will be honest that the first book didn't really click with me. Personally, I did find it a bit too lighthearted. But that's the thing about this series. The first 2 books were pretty easy, and Sullivan has a way to increase the complexity gradually. And the characters' development, all of them were very well realized. Royce and Hadrian are beloved characters, and Sullivan writes some of the best female characters in the genre, in my opinion. Even though it's been 3 years? It's been 3 years since I read the Ryria Revelations, and I still remember them very clearly. If you want a classic fantasy told in a modern narrative voice, do give this one a try. It's really worth it, and the ending was pretty satisfying. The second book I'm going to talk about is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Look how beautiful this one. This is the illustrated edition. This is the first book in the Farseer trilogy. Robin Hobb is personally my queen of fantasy. The entire 16 books. Do not let that intimidate you. See, it's not as difficult as it sounds. The division into 5 sub-series really helps new readers getting into this series much more easier than, for example, Malazan Book of the Fallen. Yeah, that one. Do not attempt that one if you're new into fantasy. Don't. No matter what anyone says, don't. Okay, I love that series, but it's crazy that some people actually recommend that as the first series to read for newcomers. But anyway, back on topic. Assassin's Apprentice is beautiful. This one is very foundational to the entire series. Very character driven, not many actions, but really worth it. The characters really come to life. Fitz, the Fool, Night Eyes, and so many more other characters are characters that became real to me now. Do it. And speaking of assassins, the third book I'm going to talk about is Age of Assassins by R.J. Barker. This is the first book in the Wounded Kingdom trilogy, and I think it's really worth checking it out. I personally think this is still one of the most underrated trilogy actually. Seriously, it's really good. And if you do love Assassin's Apprentice, do check this one out. It's a great combination of mystery, fantasy, and character-driven narrative. And the writing is so engaging. It's less than 400 pages, and the ending of this trilogy is incredibly satisfying. One of the best ending I've ever read in the trilogy, ever. The fourth book I'm going to talk about is The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington. This is the first book in the Lycaenes trilogy. I recently read this one early this year, and it has become one of the best trilogy I've ever read. And although I do highly recommend this for newcomer to adult fantasy, I think I have to say something about this trilogy is that the second and third book, the complexity improves significantly. So make sure to keep that in mind if you do find yourself engrossed in this one. But yeah, I love these books. I love this book and I love this trilogy. If you can, do give this one a try. Okay? And moving on to the fifth book, there is no way I'm making this list without talking about Brandon Sanderson. This is Mistborn, The Final Empire. I've said so many things about this trilogy that now I don't even know what to say. Let's just say this. This is the book that got me into reading adult fantasy novel. I have read a lot of books in my life, and I think I can easily say that this is the most important trilogy for me. And there is a good reason why Sanderson is very popular. There is a lot of good reason. And I think one of the reasons is that his writing is so accessible. When I'm reading a Sanderson's book, even though it's 600 or even 1000, it always feels like I flew through it. They're so easy to absorb, the world building is always incredible, and for Mistborn, it has allomancy. Allomancy is still the best magic system I have ever read in a fantasy novel. It's complex but yet easily understandable because of Sanderson's writing. Vin, Kelsier, Sazed, and Spook are characters I adored, and there are so many characters here that I love them all. Okay, but I do understand that this trilogy are thick. Every book is like about 600 or 700 pages long, and in total there are at least 2000 pages. With that in mind, let's move on to the second category, which is a standalone. So the next book I'm going to talk about is Warbreaker, again by Brandon Sanderson. This one is 650 pages and it's a standalone. There will be a sequel one day. I think it's still a long time. I think in 2024, the soonest. My prediction is 2025. But no worries, this is standalone and there is no cliffhanger, and it still has all the strength of Sanderson's storytelling. But what if you still found this too daunting? There is another option, and it's the Ampersal by, again, okay, this is the last one in this list, by again Brandon Sanderson. Not too many people talk about this book. This is a novella, it's only about 100 pages long. It will probably take you 2 hours to read this one, but honestly, this is one of Sanderson's best work. Next book I'm going to talk about is Race the Sands by Sarah Batters. This is another great one. It's about monster racing. The book displays a lot of important and relatable topics. The most prominent one is love for animal and redemption, and lastly mother's affection. This was the first time I read Sarah Batters' work, and I do know that I have to check out more of her books in the future. And the next book I'm going to talk about is Never Die by Rob Hayes. Rob Hayes? Rob Hayes? I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Rob. This is an Asian-inspired fantasy, and I absolutely enjoyed this one. This was so fun, so engaging, so entertaining, and I don't want to spoil too much about this one because it's only 250 pages long. Do give this one a try as well. This is Asian-inspired fantasy, and I think it's a really great one. And here's a fun fact. It has the longest prologue I've ever read. Ta-da! And now we're up to the 10th book in this list. It is Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. This is the first book in the Banned trilogy, and I highly adore this book. This is very entertaining, it's full of heart, and Eames has a very great prose that's also easy to read. I read Kings of the Wild all the way back in May 2017. That's 3 months after this book was first published. And when I first read it, I immediately called it one of the best debut of all time. And I knew, I knew immediately that this was going to be big. A lot of people will love this, and it seems like I was right. Just within 30 pages, I almost cried. That's that's incredible. Not a lot of books can do that to me. I never cried reading books. And to do that in 30 pages is something truly incredible. So yeah, read this one. If you're a fan of music, if you're a fan of video games, if you're a fan of Final Fantasy, just read this, okay? It's really fun. Although this is the first book of a trilogy, this is a standalone. And the next book, Bloody Rose, is also a standalone. There is no cliffhanger, and you should rest assured that you will be satisfied when you finish the book. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Lies of Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is the first book in the Gentleman Bastard series. Out of all the books I mentioned in this list, this one probably has the most profanity in its prose. But it's hilarious if you're into that. I think some of the curses that Lynch included was incredibly original and entertaining. This is most often advertised as Ocean 11 with a fantasy setting in Venice, and I think that's really the best way to describe it in a short way. The first book works really well as a standalone. A lot of people love this one. I highly love this one as well. One of my favorite debut, but yeah, it's a part of an incomplete series, but I do think that shouldn't push you off from reading this one. It's so good, so good. And now we move on to the third category, the first book of an incomplete series, and you probably know what I'm going to talk about. The Name of the Wind by Petrik Rothfuss. It's a bit difficult to recommend this one without warning you that the series probably will never be finished, but I cannot deny my love for this book, okay? It's one of the best books I've ever read. When people ask me, what's your favorite fantasy debut, I immediately will pick this one. This is at my number one spot, always. And I don't know if I will ever find another fantasy debut better than this. There's just something purely magical about Rothfuss' writing. And it's even better because the vocabulary that he chose aren't actually difficult. It's the way he structured his words, his paragraph, his sentences, everything, just everything. As Lin-Manuel Miranda said, no one writes about economic reality within this genre like Petrik Rothfuss. No one writes about music like Petrik Rothfuss. No one writes about stories like Petrik Rothfuss. How the right story at the right time can change the world, how the teller can shape a life. No one writes like Petrik Rothfuss. Full stop, read this book. And I wholeheartedly agree. If you somehow haven't read this one, do give this one a try. A lot of people have found their love for fantasy from reading this book, and I think it's a really great choice. So yeah, read it. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Bards Blade by Brian Anderson. This one was released last year. It's a high fantasy with two main characters, and both of them are very lovable characters. There has been some mixed reception for this one due to Anderson's writing that can feel a bit too young for young adult audience, and I do understand how it can be received that way by some readers. But still, despite that, I think this is a well-written book. The writing is very easy to absorb, and if you've been longing for a fantasy books with Bard as the main character, other than The Name of the Wind, this is your choice. Oh, by the way, speaking about bards, if you do know another fantasy series with Bard as the main character, please do let me know. The next one is The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This is the first book out of 4 in the Burning series, and the second book comes out 2 months from now in November. This is an African-inspired epic fantasy. For those of you who are looking for a very fast-paced and action-packed first book of a series, choose this one. Evan Winter's battle scene is incredibly good, and the magic system reminded me of Dark Souls. I don't want to spoil it too much, but it did remind me of Dark Souls, the video game. If you have played Dark Souls and you have read this book, maybe you'll understand what I'm talking about. Another quality of this book is that The Rage of Dragons reminded me of Red Rising combined with The First Law by Abercrombie. The 15th book I'm going to talk about is Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the first book in the Founders trilogy, and the next, I think the third book will come out next year. Robert Jackson Bennett is one of my favorite authors, and he writes fantasy books that's really hard to categorize. It's always like a mix of sci-fi, urban fantasy, and epic fantasy. I was going to choose City of Stairs, his previous series before this one, but I think that one can be a bit difficult for newcomers to fantasy. This one is very reminiscent of Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. If you have enjoyed Mistborn trilogy, I think there is a good chance that you will love this one too. Next, we have Jade CD by Fonda Lee. This is, again, of course, just like many books in this list, one of my favorite trilogy. Fonda Lee is a great writer, and this is one heck of an Asian-inspired urban fantasy series. This is an urban fantasy that takes place in a fictional world. There is so much to praise about this book and this series. The third book will come out next year. The title is Jade Legacy, and both Jade CD and both Jade War are in my favorite shelf. I love both of them so much. The characters felt real, the settings are so easy to realize, and Fonda Lee, oh my god, she has no mercy towards her characters. These characters suffers a lot, and because you have cared about them, their pain felt even more real, more palpable. So yeah, I think Jade City has a great possibility of being your gateway into fantasy. The next book I'm going to talk about is Blood of Earth by Alicia von Stolberg. This is the first book in the Choridic Sagas trilogy, and if I'm not mistaken, the next book will come out next year. This is really worth checking out if you're into coming-of-age fantasy. It's the two main characters, Lidan and Ranot, were very easy to care for, and I genuinely care about their journey when I read through it. And hey, look at this. My review! On to the next one, we have The Bards Blade by Chris Wooding. This is the first book in the Darkwater Legacy trilogy, and there is no sign of the next book coming out yet, but the first book worked really well as a standalone. Okay, not many people have talked about this book, but seriously, it was amazing. One of the greatest things about The Bards Blade is that Wooding effectively combined the best part about classic epic fantasy and the morally grey characterizations in grimdark fantasy. But then again, this is not grimdark, and I believe that if you love character-driven fantasy, you will love these characters. It's 800 pages long, but it was very satisfying. I'm already looking forward to read this one. It's really good. We only have 2 more books left in this list. Whew! The next one is Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. This is the first book in the Burning Blade and Silver Eye trilogy. I love Django Wexler's book. He is mostly well known for his military fantasy series called the Shadow Campaigns, but I do believe that the Shadow Campaign is harder to access than Ashes of the Sun. Ashes of the Sun, on the other hand, is a Star Wars inspired fantasy, and the narrative is very, very addictive. It's almost 600 pages long, and I finished it within 3 days. Believe me, finishing an epic fantasy book within 3 days of that size on 2020 is something that's hard to do, but Ashes of the Sun make it so easy, and I do believe that people who's looking to get into adult fantasy can read this one. And Django Wexler is really good at characterizations. This was already proven in his Shadow Campaign series, and he proved it once again here. And not only that, the romance that he writes are really good. I mean, seriously, if you know me, you know how critical I am of romance in fantasy. But yeah, I love the romance that Wexler's put into his books. I find that they're not infuriating, and the motivation behind the characters were easy to care for and understandable. And we have the last book on this list is The Black Sun by Rebecca Ronhorst. This is the first book in Between Earth and Sky trilogy. And let's not talk about the next book for now because this book hasn't come out yet. I'm cheating a bit here because I read an advanced reading copy. But this book comes out next month, and I do think it's worth checking it out. I don't want to say too much about this book yet because the book hasn't come out, but I already have a full spoiler-free review written and posted on Goodreads and my blog Novel Notions. So if you think this book looks interesting, you can read my review. Well, we've come to the end of this list. Whew! That was long. Okay, this is the first time I tried doing something like this, and wow, this really took a lot out of me. I hope the quality of this content live up to your expectation, and if not, I apologize and I will improve myself in my future content. And just as a reminder, I have written a full spoiler-free review for all of these books and you can check them out on Goodreads. That's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Seriously, I truly appreciate it. Your support means a lot to me, and I don't know what else to say. Tell me, have you read any of these books I mentioned? And do you spot any favorites? Because actually this list contains some of my favorite books of all time. And do you agree with this list? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Bye!